I pulled into my driveway after a 12-hour shift at the post office, my eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets and postal regulations all day, only to find a bright orange envelope taped to my front door. The envelope wasn't stamped, wasn't addressed, just sitting there like a scarecrow in my peripheral vision, and I already knew what it was before I even touched it. My name is Keith Kingston, and I'm the postmaster for the entire Riverside County region in California, overseeing 43 post offices and managing compliance with federal postal regulations. I've been working for the United States Postal Service for 19 years, climbing my way up from a mail carrier to my current position. I live in a planned community called Meadowbrook Estates in Temecula, California, a place that looked perfect on paper when my wife and I bought our house 6 years ago. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained parks, a community pool, and houses that all looked like they belonged in a magazine spread about suburban American dreams. What they don't tell you in the glossy brochures is that Meadowbrook Estates comes with an HOA that makes the IRS look relaxed. I ripped open the envelope and pulled out the letter, written on cream-colored cardstock with an embossed logo at the top that read, Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. The letter was dated 3 days ago, which meant it had been sitting in my mailbox for at least 2 days before someone decided to tape it to my door for emphasis. Dear Mr. Kingston, it began, in that fake polite tone that HOA letters always use. It has come to our attention that your residential mailbox, located at 4782 Sycamore Lane, is not in compliance with the Meadowbrook Estates Architectural Guidelines, Section 7, Subsection D, regarding approved exterior colors and finishes. Your mailbox is currently painted in an unauthorized shade of blue that does not match any of the 17 pre-approved colors listed in the HOA Color Palette Guide, revised March 2024. You are hereby fined $150 for this violation. Additionally, you have 14 days to repaint your mailbox in an approved color, or you will incur an additional fine of $50 per day until the violation is corrected. Please remit payment to the HOA office at your earliest convenience. The letter was signed by Patricia Hendricks, HOA president, in looping cursive that probably took her 20 minutes to perfect. I stood there on my front porch, reading the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure climb with each pass. My mailbox was regulation postal blue, the exact shade specified in the USP's Domestic Mail Manual, Section 508.3.1.1, which outlined the standards for curbside mailbox installation. I didn't just paint it that color because I liked it. I painted it that color because it was literally my job to know and enforce these standards. I looked across the street at my mailbox, standing there innocently at the curb. It was a standard rural-style mailbox, mounted on a wooden post that I'd installed myself according to USP's height and setback requirements. The blue was crisp and clean, exactly 42 inches from the ground to the bottom of the mailbox, exactly 6 to 8 inches back from the curb. Everything about it was perfect, at least according to federal postal regulations. But apparently, not according to Patricia Hendricks and her color palette guide. I walked inside, tossed my keys on the kitchen counter, and immediately pulled out my laptop. My wife, Sarah, was visiting her sister in Portland for the week, which meant I had the house to myself and could properly stew in my irritation without anyone telling me to let it go. I opened my email and started drafting a response to the HOA, citing the relevant postal regulations, including the fact that mailboxes fall under federal jurisdiction and that HOA rules cannot supersede federal postal requirements. I was 3 paragraphs into my email when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Marcus Webb, my assistant postmaster who handled day-to-day operations at the Temecula post office. "Keith, we've got a situation," Marcus said without preamble. "That new carrier, Jennifer, delivered to the wrong street again. Whole block of people calling and saying they got their neighbor's mail." I closed my eyes and counted to 5. "Which street?" "Maple Grove. She mixed it up with Maple Grove Court." "All right, I'll handle it in the morning. Have her pull the route and we'll get someone else on it tomorrow. She needs more training before she goes out solo again." "Already done. Listen, are you okay? You sound stressed." "Just HOA nonsense. They're trying to find me for my mailbox color." Marcus laughed, a deep belly laugh that made me crack a smile despite my mood. "Your mailbox? The one that's literally postal regulation blue? That's the one." "Man, that's rich. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. Probably show up to their next meeting with a printout of the entire USP's domestic mail manual. That's like 600 pages. "Exactly." We talked for a few more minutes about scheduling and a grant application we were working on for new delivery vehicles, then hung up. I finished my email to the HOA, attached a PDF of the relevant postal regulations, and hit send. Then I made myself dinner, watched a documentary about the history of the interstate highway system, and went to bed. The next morning I was up at 5:30, showered, dressed, and out the door by 6:15. The Temecula post office was a 20-minute drive from my house, a modern brick building with a large parking lot and a drive-through mail drop. I'd been working out of this location for 4 years, and I knew every inch of the place, from the loading dock where the mail trucks backed into the back office, where we kept the ancient microfilm machine that nobody knew how to use anymore. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sorting through a stack of express packages that needed to go out on the morning routes. "Morning, boss. Coffee's fresh." "You're a saint," I said, pouring myself a cup from the ancient coffee maker in the break room. The coffee was terrible, burned and bitter, but it was hot and caffeinated, which was all that mattered at 6:30 in the morning. We spent the morning dealing with the usual chaos. A customer came in wanting to mail a package to Australia without paying for international shipping. Another customer insisted that their mail was being stolen, even though we had delivery confirmation showing it was being placed in their mailbox every day. A third customer wanted to know why their letter to their nephew in Ohio was taking 3 days instead of 2, and I had to explain that mail doesn't teleport across the country. Around 10, I got a response to my email. It wasn't from Patricia Hendricks. It was from someone named Deborah Morrison, identified as the HOA compliance officer, whatever that meant. "Mr. Kingston," the email began, and I already didn't like the tone. "Thank you for your email regarding the mailbox violation at 4782 Sycamore Lane. While we appreciate your citation of postal regulations, the Meadowbrook Estate's architectural guidelines clearly state that all exterior elements visible from the street must conform to the approved color palette. This includes mailboxes, regardless of any external regulations you may believe apply. Your fine stands, and the 14-day correction period has begun. If you wish to appeal this decision, you may submit a written request to appear before the HOA board at their next monthly meeting, scheduled for March 15th at 7 p.m. in the community center." March 15th was 12 days away. I looked at the calendar on my wall, already marked up with meetings, training sessions, and compliance audits. I had a regional conference call on March 15th at 6 p.m., but I could probably wrap that up by 7 if I needed to. I hit reply and typed out a short response. "I would like to appeal this decision. I will attend the meeting on March 15th. Please confirm my appearance on the agenda. The response came back within an hour. Confirmed. You will have 5 minutes to present your case. 5 minutes. I dealt with hostile congressional staffers who gave me more time than that. Over the next week and a half, I prepared my case like I was arguing before the Supreme Court. I printed out the relevant sections of the USP's Domestic Mail Manual. I pulled up the federal regulations from Title 39 of the Code of Federal Regulations. I created a PowerPoint presentation with photos of my mailbox, diagrams showing the proper installation standards, and citations to case law where HOAs had tried to regulate mailboxes and lost. I also did some research on the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Patricia Hendricks had been president for 4 years, running unopposed in every election because nobody else wanted the job. Deborah Morrison, the compliance officer, was a retired real estate agent who apparently spent her days driving around the neighborhood with a clipboard, documenting violations. There were 5 board members total, all middle-aged or older, all retired or working part-time. The meeting minutes from the past year showed a pattern of aggressive enforcement. Fines for trash cans left out past 7 a.m. Fines for cars parked in driveways overnight. Fines for grass that was a 1/4 inch too long. It was a power trip, plain and simple, and my mailbox was just the latest target. Sarah called me on March 14th, the night before the meeting. She was still in Portland, helping her sister recover from knee surgery. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm fine. HOA meeting tomorrow night." "Keith, please don't make this into a bigger thing than it needs to be. Just repaint the mailbox and move on." "It's not about the mailbox, Sarah. It's about the principle. They can't override federal regulations." She sighed, that long-suffering sigh that meant she thought I was being stubborn but loved me anyway. "I know you're right about the regulations. I just don't want you to spend the next 6 months fighting with these people. It won't take 6 months. I'll explain the law, they'll back down, and that'll be the end of it. You have a lot of faith in reasonable people. I have a lot of faith in the law." We talked for a while longer about her sister's recovery and the weather in Portland, and whether we should repaint the kitchen this summer. After we hung up, I went back to reviewing my notes for the meeting, highlighting key passages and rehearsing my presentation. The next day dragged by in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I had my regional conference call at 6. A discussion about new parcel sorting equipment that the Postal Service was rolling out nationwide. The call ran long, and I had to cut out at 6:55, apologizing and promising to review the meeting notes later. I drove straight to the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center, a low-slung building near the main entrance of the neighborhood. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a handful of cars clustered near the front door. I grabbed my laptop bag, took a deep breath, and headed inside. The community center had a large multipurpose room with folding tables set up in a U-shape at the front. 5 people sat behind the tables, Patricia Hendricks in the center, flanked by 4 others I didn't recognize. Deborah Morrison sat at a small desk off to the side, typing on a laptop. About a dozen residents sat in the audience chairs, most of them looking bored or checking their phones. Patricia Hendricks looked exactly like I'd imagined. Late 50s, perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing a blazer and pearls like she was attending a country club luncheon instead of an HOA meeting. She had that pinched expression that some people get when they've spent too many years being in charge of things that don't matter. "Good evening, everyone," Patricia said, rapping a gavel on the table even though everyone was already quiet. "Let's call this meeting to order. We have several items on the agenda tonight, including budget approval for the pool resurfacing project, a vote on the holiday decoration guidelines, and one appeal. Mr. Kingston, you're here regarding the mailbox violation at 4782 Sycamore Lane, correct? I stood up. That's correct. We'll hear your appeal after we cover the other agenda items. Please have a seat. I sat back down, trying not to let my frustration show. I glanced at my watch. It was already 7:15. The board spent the next 45 minutes discussing the pool resurfacing project in excruciating detail. Did they want the blue tile or the teal tile? Should they add a waterfall feature? What about extending the deck area? Every board member had an opinion, and Patricia ran the discussion like a corporate CEO, calling for votes and noting objections and tabling items for further research. Finally, at 8 o'clock, she turned her attention back to me. Mr. Kingston, you may present your appeal. You have 5 minutes. I walked to the front of the room and opened my laptop, connecting it to the projector they had set up. My PowerPoint appeared on the screen behind me, the title slide reading Federal Postal Regulations and HOA Authority. Thank you for your time, I began. My name is Keith Kingston, and I'm the Regional Postmaster for Riverside County. I'm here tonight to appeal the fine issued for my mailbox color, which the HOA has determined is not in compliance with the community's architectural guidelines. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a photo of my mailbox. This mailbox is painted in USP's Regulation Blue, the specific shade required by the United States Postal Service for curbside residential mailboxes. This isn't a personal preference or a design choice. It's a federal requirement outlined in the USP's Domestic Mail Manual, Section 508.3.1.1. I clicked again, showing a screenshot of the relevant regulation. The manual states, and I quote, "Curbside mailboxes must be painted in approved USP's colors to ensure visibility and compliance with postal delivery standards. The approved colors include white, gray, and this specific shade of blue. My mailbox meets all federal requirements for height, setback, and color." Patricia Hendricks raised her hand. Mr. Kingston, while we appreciate your explanation, the HOA guidelines clearly state that all exterior elements must conform to our approved palette. We have 17 approved colors, and your blue is not one of them. With all due respect, Mrs. Hendricks, HOA rules cannot supersede federal regulations. The Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution establishes that federal law takes precedence over state and local regulations, which includes homeowner association rules. I clicked to the next slide, which showed the text of the Supremacy Clause. There's established case law on this issue. In Henderson v. Meadowview HOA, a Colorado case from 2019, the court ruled that an HOA could not require a homeowner to remove a mailbox that complied with USP's regulations but violated HOA aesthetic guidelines. The court found that postal regulations have federal authority and cannot be restricted by private community rules. Deborah Morrison spoke up from her desk. Mr. Kingston, are you saying that federal employees can ignore HOA rules? I'm saying that, when there's a conflict between federal regulations and HOA rules, federal regulations prevail. This isn't about my position as a postmaster. Any homeowner in this community has the right to install a mailbox that complies with postal regulations, regardless of whether it matches your color palette. One of the board members, a man in his 60s wearing a golf shirt, leaned forward. So if I wanted to paint my mailbox hot pink and claim it was a postal regulation, you're saying the HOA couldn't do anything about it? Hot pink isn't a USP's approved color, so that wouldn't apply. But yes, if your mailbox meets postal regulations, The HOA cannot require you to change it." Patricia's face was getting redder as I spoke. "This is absurd. We have rules in this community for a reason. If we let everyone do whatever they want with their mailboxes, what's next? People painting their houses purple, installing giant statues in their front yards." Mailboxes are specifically regulated by federal law because they're part of the national postal infrastructure. Houses and lawn decorations are not. There's a clear legal distinction. I could see that this wasn't going the way they'd expected. Patricia conferred quietly with the other board members for a moment, then turned back to me. "Mr. Kingston, we'll take your appeal under advisement and vote on it. You'll receive our decision within 7 business days. With respect, I'd like to know the outcome tonight. I've presented clear legal precedent showing that your fine is not enforceable." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "We need time to review your information and consult with our attorney. 7 business days." I gathered my laptop and returned to my seat, my jaw tight. The meeting continued with a discussion about holiday decoration guidelines. Apparently someone had put up an inflatable Santa that was deemed too large, but I wasn't really listening. I was mentally drafting the letter I was going to send to the HOA's attorney, citing every relevant case and statute I could find. After the meeting ended, I was packing up my laptop when Patricia approached me. Up close, she was even more intimidating, with sharp blue eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. "Mr. Kingston, I understand you feel strongly about this issue, but I want to remind you that Meadowbrook Estates is a covenant-controlled community. When you purchased your home, you agreed to abide by our rules and guidelines. Those rules exist to maintain property values and community standards. I agreed to reasonable rules that don't conflict with federal law. Your mailbox color requirement conflicts with federal law." "That's your interpretation. Our attorney may have a different view." "Then I look forward to hearing from your attorney. I'm sure they'll be interested in the case law I've cited." Patricia's smile got tighter. "We'll be in touch." She walked away, and I left the community center feeling like I just stepped into a boxing ring. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Over the next week, I heard nothing from the HOA. No email, no letter, no decision on my appeal. Meanwhile, the original 14-day deadline for fixing my mailbox came and went. On the 15th day, I found another orange envelope taped to my door. "Dear Mr. Kingston, you have failed to correct the mailbox violation at 4782 Sycamore Lane within the required time frame. As stated in our original notice, you are now subject to daily fines of $50 until the violation is corrected. Your current balance is $150 for the original fine, plus $750 for 15 days of non-compliance, for a total of $900. Please remit payment immediately. $900. For a mailbox that was in perfect compliance with federal regulations. I took a photo of the letter and forwarded it to Marcus, along with a message. "This is getting ridiculous." He replied within minutes. "Don't pay it. Let them try to collect. You'll bury them in court." That afternoon, I sent a formal letter to the HOA via certified mail. Return receipt requested. The letter outlined my legal position, cited the relevant cases and regulations, and stated clearly that I would not be paying any fines related to my mailbox. I also requested that the HOA immediately cease issuing additional fines and rescind all existing fines related to this matter. 3 days later, I got a response. Not from Patricia or Deborah, but from a law firm in San Diego, Morrison and Associates, attorneys at law. The letter was 2 pages of legal boilerplate, but the gist was simple. The HOA rejected my appeal, upheld the fines, and demanded payment within 30 days or they would place a lien on my property. They also claimed that my mailbox posed a visual nuisance to the community and that I was in violation of the CC and Articles, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern the neighborhood. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. They were actually going to try to put a lien on my house over a mailbox color. I forwarded the letter to my own attorney, Robert Chen, who I'd worked with on a few real estate matters over the years. Robert was a sharp lawyer in his early 40s, specializing in property law and HOA disputes. He called me the next day. "Keith, this is one of the most ridiculous cases I've seen in a while, and I've seen some doozies. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. So what do? We file a declaratory judgment action. We ask the court to declare that your mailbox is in compliance with federal regulations and that the HOA's fines are unenforceable. We might also ask for attorney fees and costs, since they're pursuing a clearly frivolous claim. How long will that take? 6 months, maybe longer. But in the meantime, don't pay them anything. Let them keep sending their threatening letters. Every letter they send is more evidence that they're acting unreasonably." I thanked Robert and hung up, then sat at my kitchen table staring at the law firm's letter. Part of me wanted to just repaint the mailbox and be done with it. It would be easier, cheaper, and less stressful. But every time I thought about giving in, I remembered Patricia's smug face at the meeting, and Deborah's condescending email, and all the other homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates, who were probably being nickel and dimed over equally petty violations. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who hid behind rules and regulations to justify their power trips. The next HOA letter arrived 2 weeks later, informing me that my total fines were now $1,650, and that if I didn't pay within 10 days, they would file a lien on my property. True to their word, 10 days after that, I received a notice that a lien had been filed with the county recorder's office. Robert immediately filed our declaratory judgment action in Riverside County Superior Court. The complaint was thorough and devastating, laying out the federal postal regulations, the case law supporting federal preemption, and the HOA's pattern of aggressive enforcement. We also filed a motion for a temporary restraining order, asking the court to immediately remove the lien pending the outcome of the case. The HOA fought back, filing their own brief arguing that federal postal regulations only applied to the Postal Service itself, not to individual homeowners, and that the CC and Articles were a private contract that I had voluntarily entered into when I purchased my home. It was a weak argument, and Robert demolished it in our reply brief. He pointed out that postal regulations explicitly covered residential mailboxes, not just post office operations, and that private contracts cannot override federal law. The hearing on our motion was scheduled for early June, 3 months after the original violation notice. Sarah was back home by then, and she came with me to the courthouse for moral support. "This is insane," she said as we walked through the security screening. "I can't believe you're in court over a mailbox. I can't believe they filed a lien on our house over a mailbox." The hearing was in a small courtroom on the 3rd floor. Judge Margaret Sullivan presided, a woman in her early 60s with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. Robert and I sat at one table, while the HOA's attorney, a young guy in an expensive suit who looked fresh out of law school, sat at the other. Judge Sullivan got right to the point. "I've reviewed the briefs and the evidence. Mr. Chen, your argument is that federal postal regulations preempt the HOA's color requirements." Robert stood up. "That's correct, Your Honor." The USP's domestic mail manual explicitly requires certain colors for residential mailboxes, and Mr. Kingston's mailbox complies with those requirements. The Supremacy Clause of the Constitution establishes that federal law prevails over conflicting state or local regulations, and that includes private HOA rules. The HOA's attorney stood up. "Your Honor, the CC and Articus are a private contract." Mr. Kingston agreed to those terms when he purchased his property. The federal government isn't a party to that contract, and postal regulations don't give individual homeowners the right to violate their contractual obligations. Judge Sullivan looked at him skeptically. "Counsel, are you arguing that a private contract can override federal law?" "I'm arguing that there's no conflict here, Your Honor." Mr. Kingston could comply with both the postal regulations and the HOA rules by choosing one of the approved colors that also meets postal standards. Robert jumped in. "Your Honor, that's not accurate. The USP's regulations specify exact color standards, including specific paint codes. The HOA's approved colors don't include those specific shades. Mr. Kingston can't comply with both requirements simultaneously." Judge Sullivan flipped through the papers in front of her, then looked up. "I'm going to grant the motion for a temporary restraining order. The lien is removed pending the outcome of this case. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to cease issuing any further fines related to the mailbox at 4782 Sycamore Lane until this matter is resolved." The HOA's attorney started to object, but Judge Sullivan cut him off. "Counsel, your client is fighting a losing battle here. Federal preemption is well-established law. I strongly suggest you advise your client to drop this matter and focus on issues where they actually have legal authority." She set a trial date for September, then dismissed us. As Robert and I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. We weren't done yet, but we'd won the first major battle. Over the summer, the HOA continued to dig in their heels. They hired a new attorney, someone with more experience, and filed amended briefs arguing that mailboxes were private property, not part of the postal infrastructure, and therefore not subject to federal regulation. They also tried to bring in an expert witness, some architectural consultant, who was going to testify about the importance of aesthetic consistency in planned communities. Robert countered with our own expert witness, the regional USP's compliance director, who submitted a declaration explaining in detail how and why mailbox regulations existed, and how those regulations applied to every residential mailbox in the country, not just the ones at post offices. As the trial date approached, something unexpected happened. I started getting emails and calls from other Meadowbrook Estates residents who had their own horror stories about the HOA. A couple on Maple Grove had been fined $500 because their front yard tree was casting a shadow on their neighbor's lawn. A single mother on Birch Street had been fined repeatedly for having a work van parked in her driveway, even though she needed it for her job as a plumber. An elderly man on Oak Circle had been threatened with foreclosure because he couldn't afford to replace his roof in the HOA's required time frame after it was damaged in a storm. The stories kept coming, each one more outrageous than the last. It became clear that my mailbox situation wasn't an isolated incident. Patricia Hendricks and her board had been running Meadowbrook Estates like a fiefdom, using fines and violations as a way to control and intimidate residents. One evening in late August, I was sitting on my back patio with Sarah, enjoying the cooler evening air, when she said something that changed the entire trajectory of the case. "You know what you should do? You should run for the HOA board." I looked at her. "What?" "Elections are in November, right? Run for the board. If you win, you can change things from the inside. Sarah, I don't have time to be on an HOA board. I'm managing 43 post offices. You're already spending all your time fighting with them. Might as well make it official. I thought about it. She was right. I was already neck deep in this mess, and if I could get on the board, I could push for real reforms, not just for myself, but for all the other residents who were being harassed and fined over petty nonsense. The next day, I submitted my candidacy for the HOA board. According to the bylaws, there were 5 board positions, and 3 of them were up for election this year. Patricia Hendricks was running for re-election as president. Deborah Morrison was running for another term as compliance officer. The 3rd open position was currently held by the guy in the golf shirt who had asked me about the hot pink mailbox. My candidacy caused an immediate uproar. Patricia sent out an email to all residents, warning them about candidates who refused to follow community rules and individuals who put their personal interests above the community's welfare. She didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. I responded with my own email, laying out my platform: reasonable enforcement of rules, transparency in board decisions, and an end to excessive fines for minor violations. I also mentioned that I was the regional postmaster, with extensive experience in regulatory compliance and policy implementation. The response was overwhelming. Within a day, I had dozens of emails from residents expressing support. People started sharing their own stories of HOA overreach, and a grassroots campaign emerged to vote out Patricia and her allies. Meanwhile, the trial was approaching. Robert and I spent hours preparing, reviewing testimony and strategizing. The HOA's new attorney was tougher than the first one, and they were clearly prepared to fight this all the way. The trial began on September 18th. It was scheduled for 3 days, though Robert thought we could wrap it up in 2. The courtroom was packed with Meadowbrook Estates residents, many of them wearing blue ribbons in solidarity with my mailbox. The HOA's attorney went first, calling Patricia Hendricks to the stand. She testified about the importance of community standards and how the CC and Articus were essential to maintaining property values. She showed photos of Meadowbrook Estates, highlighting the uniform appearance of the neighborhood. Mrs. Hendricks, the attorney asked, what would happen if residents were allowed to ignore the architectural guidelines? Patricia leaned into the microphone. The community would deteriorate. Property values would decline. We've worked very hard to create a beautiful, cohesive neighborhood, and rules like the color palette are essential to preserving that. On cross-examination, Robert went for the jugular. Mrs. Hendricks, you testified that Mr. Kingston's mailbox violates the community's aesthetic standards. But his mailbox is painted in a color required by federal law, correct? It's not one of our approved colors. That's not what I asked. Is his mailbox painted in a color required by federal postal regulations? Patricia hesitated. According to Mr. Kingston, yes. And you've seen the postal regulations he provided, correct? I've seen documents he claims are postal regulations. Robert pulled out a copy of the USP's Domestic Mail Manual and entered it into evidence. Your Honor, this is an official publication of the United States Postal Service. Mrs. Hendricks, do you dispute the authenticity of this document? Patricia looked flustered. No, and this document specifies that Mr. Kingston's mailbox color is required for curbside mailboxes, correct? I'm not an expert on postal regulations. But you are an expert on HOA rules, aren't you? And you decided to fine Mr. Kingston despite knowing that his mailbox complied with federal requirements. We have rules that residents agreed to follow. Robert pressed on. How many other residents have been fined for mailbox violations? I don't have that number off the top of my head. More than 10, possibly. More than 20. I'd have to check our records. Robert introduced a spreadsheet showing that the HOA had issued 47 mailbox-related fines over the past 2 years, generating over $12,000 in revenue for the HOA. Mrs. Hendricks, isn't it true that these fines are a significant source of income for the HOA? The HOA's attorney objected, but Judge Sullivan overruled him. Patricia's face was red. The fines are meant to ensure compliance, not generate revenue. But they do generate revenue, don't they? Over $40,000 last year from various violation fines. That money goes into the HOA's operating budget. And who controls that budget? The board. The board that you've been president of for 4 years. Patricia didn't answer. The rest of the trial went similarly. Robert systematically dismantled the HOA's arguments, showing that federal preemption was clear and unambiguous, and that the HOA's enforcement was inconsistent and financially motivated. Our expert witness from the USPS testified about the importance of uniform mailbox standards for efficient mail delivery. He explained that color requirements weren't just aesthetic. They helped carriers identify legitimate mailboxes and prevent mail theft. The HOA's architectural consultant tried to argue that community standards were important. But on cross-examination, Robert got him to admit that he'd never studied postal regulations and didn't know whether there were any legitimate safety or operational reasons for the USPS color requirements. On the third day, Judge Sullivan issued her ruling from the bench. This case presents a clear conflict between federal regulations and private HOA rules. The law is unambiguous. When federal law conflicts with local or private regulations, federal law prevails under the Supremacy Clause. The USPS Domestic Mail Manual clearly specifies color requirements for residential mailboxes, and Mr. Kingston's mailbox complies with those requirements. The HOA's attempt to fine Mr. Kingston for compliance with federal law is not only unenforceable, it's contrary to public policy. She ordered the HOA to rescind all fines related to my mailbox, remove any liens or encumbrances on my property, and pay my attorney fees and costs, which totaled just over $18,000. Additionally, Judge Sullivan continued, I'm troubled by the evidence presented regarding the HOA's enforcement practices. Fines should be used to ensure compliance with reasonable rules, not as a revenue-generating mechanism. I strongly encourage the residents of Meadowbrook Estates to examine their HOA's practices and consider whether their elected representatives are serving the community's best interests. It was a complete victory. Robert and I walked out of the courthouse to applause from the assembled residents. People shook my hand, thanked me, and promised to vote for me in the upcoming election. Patricia Hendricks stormed past us without a word, her face like thunder. The HOA election was held on November 8th. The results weren't even close. I won my seat with 78% of the vote. 2 other reform candidates also won, defeating Deborah Morrison and the golf shirt guy. Patricia technically won re-election as president, but only because she ran unopposed. However, with 3 reform members on the 5-person board, she was effectively powerless. At our first board meeting in December, we immediately passed several reforms. We reduced the fine schedule, eliminating daily accumulating fines and capping penalties at reasonable amounts. We created a new appeals process with clear timelines and neutral arbitration. We adopted a policy that HOA rules could not conflict with federal, state, or local laws, and that any ambiguity would be resolved in favor of the homeowner. Most importantly, We amended the architectural guidelines to specifically allow mailboxes that complied with USP's regulations, regardless of color. Patricia resigned from the board in January, citing philosophical differences with the new direction. Deborah Morrison moved out of Meadowbrook Estates in February. I heard she bought a condo in a building with no HOA. As for me, I kept my position on the board for 2 years, helping to reshape the HOA into an organization that actually served the community instead of terrorizing it. We focused on real issues, maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and addressing legitimate safety concerns. Violations were handled with warnings and education first, fines only as a last resort. The lawsuit and the election became a bit of a legend in Meadowbrook Estates. New residents would hear the story and smile when they saw my blue mailbox. Some of them even painted their own mailboxes the same color, partly as a practical choice and partly as a statement. I continued working as the regional postmaster, though the story of the mailbox dispute spread through the postal service like wildfire. I became something of a folk hero among mail carriers, the guy who stood up to an HOA and won. Marcus made me a plaque for my office. Postmaster Keith Kingston, defender of mailbox rights. Sarah still thinks the whole thing was ridiculous, and she's not wrong. It was ridiculous. It was absurd that I had to go to court to defend a mailbox color. It was insane that an HOA thought they could override federal regulations. It was crazy that I spent 6 months of my life fighting over something so trivial. But it wasn't really about the mailbox. It was about the principle. It was about standing up to people who abuse their authority. It was about protecting not just my own rights, but the rights of everyone in the community who couldn't afford to fight back. Looking back, I don't regret a single moment of it. Well, maybe I regret the $18,000 in attorney fees, but the HOA paid that back, so I guess I don't even regret that. My mailbox still stands at the curb, painted in regulation postal blue, exactly 42 inches from the ground, exactly 6 to 8 inches back from the curb. It's been there for years now, untouched and unchallenged, a small but significant victory for common sense over bureaucratic nonsense. Every morning when I leave for work, I look at that mailbox and smile. It's just a mailbox, but it represents something bigger. The idea that rules should make sense, that authority should be questioned, and that sometimes the little guy can win, especially when the little guy happens to be the regional postmaster who literally wrote the book on mailbox regulations. The funny thing is, after the dust settled and the reforms were in place, Meadowbrook Estates actually became a better place to live. Property values went up, not down, because people wanted to live in a community where the HOA was reasonable and fair. Neighbors started talking to each other again, instead of watching each other suspiciously for violations. The community pool got resurfaced, the parks were better maintained, and the holiday decorations became more creative and fun. Patricia's vision of a controlled, uniform neighborhood had actually been holding us back. Once we relaxed the ridiculous rules and let people live their lives, the community flourished. I stayed on the board until my term ended, then stepped down to focus on work and family. Sarah and I are still living at 4782 Sycamore Lane, still enjoying our life in Temecula. We've talked about moving, but why would we? We've got a great house, good neighbors, and the most legally defensible mailbox in California. Last month, I got a call from a homeowner in Nevada who was fighting his HOA over a similar issue. They wanted him to remove a mailbox that complied with postal regulations, but violated their aesthetic rules. I spent an hour on the phone with him, walking him through the legal arguments and sending him copies of our court filings. I don't know how his case will turn out, but I hope he wins. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about mailboxes. It's about the right to comply with the law without being harassed by petty tyrants. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult and expensive and time-consuming. It's about refusing to back down just because someone with a clipboard and a bad attitude says you should. And if I, as the regional postmaster, couldn't stand up for proper mailbox regulations, who could? So here I am, years later, still living in the same house, still working at the same job, still driving past my blue mailbox every morning with a sense of satisfaction. The HOA tried to fine me for wrong mailbox color. They didn't know I was the local postmaster who sets the standards, and by the time they figured it out, it was too late. The mailbox won. Common sense won, and Meadowbrook Estates became a better place because of it. Sometimes the smallest battles have the biggest impacts. Sometimes standing up for something as simple as a mailbox color can change an entire community. And sometimes, just sometimes, the bureaucrat with the most knowledge wins against the bureaucrat with the most power. I tell this story to my colleagues at work sometimes, when we're dealing with frustrating regulations or difficult customers. I remind them that rules exist for a reason, and that knowing those rules, understanding those rules, and being willing to fight for those rules can make all the difference. My mailbox is still blue. It's still regulation compliant. And it's still standing there at the curb, a quiet reminder that federal law matters, that expertise matters, and that sometimes you have to go to court to defend something as simple as the right color of paint. Patricia Hendricks taught me a valuable lesson, though probably not the one she intended. She taught me that bullies come in all forms, including middle-aged women with clipboards and HOA bylaws. She taught me that the appearance of authority isn't the same as legitimate authority. And she taught me that fighting back, even when it seems easier to give in, is worth it. The residents of Meadowbrook Estates learned something too. They learned that HOAs are supposed to serve the community, not rule it. They learned that they have power through voting and participation. And they learned that one person standing up can inspire others to do the same. As for me, I learned that being the postmaster is about more than just managing mail delivery. It's about understanding and enforcing regulations that most people never think about. It's about protecting systems that keep our country running smoothly. And sometimes, it's about defending a blue mailbox against an HOA that thought they knew better. They didn't know better. I did, and that made all the difference. The end of this saga came not with a dramatic confrontation or a stunning reversal, but with something much more satisfying: quiet normalcy. The HOA stopped sending threatening letters. The fines disappeared from my account. The lien was removed from my property. And life in Meadowbrook Estates went back to what it should have been all along: peaceful, pleasant, and free from unnecessary drama over minor aesthetic details. I drive past other neighborhoods sometimes, places with their own HOAs and their own rules, and I wonder how many other residents are dealing with their own Patricia Hendricks, their own absurd violations and excessive fines. I wonder how many of them know they can fight back, that they can win, that the law is often on their side if they're willing to stand up for it. My story spread beyond just Meadowbrook Estates. Local news picked it up, running a human interest piece about the postmaster who beat his HOA. A few national publications mentioned it in articles about HOA overreach. I even got invited to speak at a property rights conference, though I declined because I had too much work to do. But the real impact wasn't in the publicity or the recognition. It was in the dozens of residents who came to me after the case was over, thanking me for standing up, telling me their own stories, and expressing relief that someone had finally pushed back against the board's excesses. One woman told me she'd been living in fear for years, constantly worried that she'd get fined for some minor violation she didn't even know existed. After the reforms we implemented, she said she finally felt like she could relax in her own home. That's what made it all worthwhile. Not the legal victory, not the vindication, but knowing that I'd helped create a better community for everyone who lived here. My blue mailbox stands as a monument to that victory. Every time I check my mail, I think about the journey it took to get here, the hours of research and preparation, the court appearances, the stress and frustration. And I think about how it all started with a simple orange envelope taped to my door, accusing me of a violation that wasn't actually a violation at all. If Patricia Hendricks had done even a basic amount of research before issuing that fine, none of this would have happened. If she'd recognized that mailboxes fall under federal jurisdiction, or if she'd been willing to back down when I presented the evidence, we could have avoided the whole mess. But she didn't, and we couldn't, and so we ended up in court, fighting over a mailbox color like it was a matter of national importance. In a way, maybe it was. Not because mailboxes matter that much in the grand scheme of things, but because the principle behind the fight matters a great deal. The principle that rules should be fair, that authority should be legitimate, and that people have the right to comply with actual laws without being punished by organizations that have no legal grounds to override those laws. I'm proud of what we accomplished. I'm proud that I stood my ground. I'm proud that other residents found the courage to speak up and vote for change. And I'm proud that Meadowbrook Estates is now a place where people can live without fear of arbitrary enforcement and excessive fines. All because of a blue mailbox and a postmaster who knew the regulations better than the HOA that tried to fine him. It's been a long journey from that first orange envelope to where we are now. But every journey begins with a single step, or in this case, a single violation notice. What matters is how you respond to that first step, whether you accept it and move on or whether you stand up and fight for what's right. I chose to fight, and I'm glad I did. My mailbox is still blue, my house is still mine, and my community is still thriving. And somewhere out there, Patricia Hendricks is probably telling people about the difficult homeowner who refused to follow the rules, never quite understanding that the rules she was trying to enforce were never valid in the first place. But that's her story to tell. Mine ends here, with a blue mailbox, a reformed HOA, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes justice and common sense actually prevail.